We spend millions preparing for cyber incidents. We invest in technology, tabletop exercises, certifications, and response playbook in our systems. What if it's how we make decisions under pressure? Today's guests believe that this missing layer in cybersecurity is the whole key to how do we defend networks. Lisa Larson spent more than 2 decades leading enterprise technology organizations and 6 years in cyber incident response before asking a simple but very powerful question. How do we prepare the people making high consequence decisions when the stakes are highest? That question became the foundation for awakening performance and her work in decision enablement. Today, we're discussing how cognitive overload affects incident response, why great playbooks still fail, and how organizations can build leaders who think more clearly under pressure. Lisa, welcome to Cybersecurity America. This is a topic really near and dear to my heart, but welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
I had a chat with you the other day when we were doing the screening call, and your topic really excited me. That's why wanted to get you on the show, because it's an area that I think is one of the most powerful aspects of not just what you're talking about in incident response, but just in making decisions in corporate America as an executive, or just making decisions in life. And how do you do that, and how do you move forward? How do you think about thinking? And I thought it was just a phenomenal area you're focusing on. And my understanding is it's not the playbooks and the tabletop exercises of old where it's let's just walk through a couple different playbooks, but you actually talk about how do you think about doing this. But I just want to kind of give you an opportunity to kind of tell me what you're involved in and kind of your background and some more about cognition and so forth. So.
Yeah, sure. I came to this realization is that the thinking about thinking is really important in a lot of different areas. You and I both spent our career in technology. I spent it in IT, professional services, sales, and breach response. I did breach response for 6 years. And the core thing that I came back to was when we're calm, we can access our fully functional brain. We can think through things very calmly, rationally. But when we're under a tremendous amounts of pressure, especially in times of crisis, our higher level thinking goes offline. And so we really make poor decisions or have the potential of making poor decisions when we're not thinking clearly. And so decision enablement or decision clarity is all about how do I quickly get to a state where I can access my playbook that's in my brain, my technical capabilities, my ability to communicate with all the stakeholders, hold all these different things in our brain at the same time in a state where I can make good decisions. So that's really where I came to that because of in breach response, what I saw was a lot of clients, we would go through a tabletop exercise and we would have an inject in a tabletop and we'd say, hey, we're investigating something. The logs are telling us that there's something to detect. An executive could go in 5 seconds flat, go from what's the fact, what's the assumption, what's the story, and make a decision. And happen really, really rapidly where we're going from, wait, we don't even know all the parts yet before we can make this decision.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like that rapid, I'm used to making decisions in this way. I need to revert to the lowest common denominator. Creative
Yeah.
thinking shouldn't happen at times of crisis. And that's why it resonated so much with me is that I've been in incident response for a while, been in many different incidents. And one of the things I've seen is just complete missteps where the IT department is trying to restore systems faster than you have containment. Why? Because there's a fear to get things all online. There's a fear from the business and what they're losing. However, the cyber teams can't actually get containment on the situation before things are being installed over it. You lose forensics information. Then it becomes this argument and this fight, and then nothing really gets handled properly. And then the cost of the incident skyrockets. Every time that occurs, the incident's cost doubles
Yes.
because of those missteps. That's why I thought it was fascinating to hear what is your system for doing that? How do I get that kind of mammalian brain to calm down and think clearly in those situations?
Yeah. So let me tell you what's actually happening because there are two competing things that are happening while that's going on. So you've got the technical team and when I say technical, I mean not only just the IT team or the security team, but also you're pulling up the playbook and you're going through the process. What's our communication strategy? All of those different things. Those are what I would consider the tasks. The other thing that's happening, and you're having to hold both of these things in your brain at the same time, is the phone. You've got the cell phone ringing, the executives calling, like, where are we? What's the next decision? What are we doing next? You've got the comms team that is wanting to put out a press release. You've got legal, what are our regulatory requirements here? So you're trying to manage all of these different competing cognitive tasks in your brain at the exact same time. And so that's what's happening in your brain. So what I teach is this protocol, and I have a framework and I call it GEAR, and it is 4 parts. And the first step is, while this is happening, your brain is trying to get you back to a safe place. So it's going to start reacting and firing off, oh, let's make this decision, that decision, this decision, because I want to get back to a state of calmness or safety. Gear, what I'm doing is in the first step is called ground. And what we're doing here is we're doing some breathing exercises and getting us back to a state of getting out of your head and back to present, in the present moment, bringing our heart rate down, getting our mind back online so that we can access our full brain. The second step is explore. So that's the E part of gear. And explore is really looking at that facts, assumptions, story. And the protocol I use there is ask, what do we actually know? What are the facts? Are we operating from an assumption? Do we have some sort of bias? Are we building a story? What do we actually know about the situation as opposed to what are the unknowns? So that we get back to, oh, okay, wait a minute. We know the logs are telling us something, but we don't have enough information yet to take the next step. The third part is where that cognitive load of managing the tasks and managing all the people, that part is called attunement. And that is recognizing what sort of pressure are you feeling. And that can be pressure to respond to the executive. It could be pressure that you're putting on yourself, which is, I need to have an answer right away because everybody's looking at me to make the answer. Or it could be the pressure of, we still don't know what's going on. So it's recognize what is the pressure, and is that a real pressure or is it pressure that you're putting on yourself, and naming it and labeling it. And the last step of gear is called resolve. And that is, what is the next best step? Because a lot of times what we do is we start thinking about all the steps and we get into analysis paralysis because we're looking for more data, more information, and we freeze because we don't have all of that information. So we try to solve everything all at one time as opposed to taking one step. So that's the protocol that I teach in this decision clarity or decision enablement framework. But it also just starts with, how do I think? So when I think, I bring my own bias in, and I have my own perceived notions about decision making. You come in with your own bias, and everybody else sitting around the table has their own bias towards decision making. And then as an organization, we collectively have a bias towards how we make decisions. So when you're running through that gear protocol, it's really important in the tabletop exercises is to think about, how do we think about how we make decisions? And that's what I think is the missing piece.
No, I agree with you. I know it's the missing piece. I don't think it is. I know it's the missing piece. I've been one of the biggest problems I saw. Like, I was in New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina, and we had backup generators. And so the bank that I was at, Whitney Bank, had backup generators. There was another one that was in the area, and just thinking through all the disasters of not having a fuel contract, for instance, for generators. You could have the state-of-the-art generator, but if you don't have a fuel contract, nobody's bringing you fuel, and you're out in 72 hours, and you have to shut the data center down. And it was such a panicked environment during Katrina, because you weren't just making decisions for the business. You had to make personal decisions because you had to personally evacuate with your entire family.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I saw people juggling the being there for my family and being there for the company at the same time, and which one wins over. And it was a very difficult and trying time period for that. And decision enablement, I think, is really a clarity. I give you an example in M&A. That's what struck me so clearly last time we spoke was in M&A activity. This happens all the time. There's these cultural things that come with a merger. And you have one culture that says we do approvals this way. You have this other culture that didn't. One of the banks that I was at for a while had this policy that you couldn't buy a laptop docking station. You could have a laptop, but they didn't want to pay for the docking station. Everyone who ever requested one, the CIO like had this real bad thing against docking stations. So it was like impossible to get a docking station. So the merger occurs. And the first thing I want, I'm in cybersecurity. I need greater port density. So I want a docking station. And just immediate, you're crazy for asking that. Nobody's ever asked for docking. I was shocked that it was so, we had them all over the place at the bank I was at. So we do this merger and all of a sudden we can't have one. And what I kind of found out, it was just this cultural thing. And I put a business case together why I needed one. And he didn't want to hear the word convenience. He wanted to hear the word of something else. And I wrote something also that said it had port density. I needed this. And I had a logical response to that. And then it got approved. And then everybody thought I had like secret information on the guy. How in the world did you get that approved?
Yeah.
And I kind of think it's walking through what you were talking about is how do I think about approaching this problem with him? I could have just ran in his office, yelled and screamed, I needed port density. That wasn't gonna work right. If I got fearful of the process or intimidated by the process, then I had no real justification in the first place, is their thinking. Like I shut this down all the time, but unless you just really have a good one, I'm not going to hear about it. And so it was interesting how that kind of that fear of bringing that up. But how do you make these decisions in the incident response world? I like tying it towards the tabletops because a lot of times you're working through what does the run book tell you to do? Okay. We had ransomware out on this section. What is what is the run book? And you do need this skeleton of action. Like my time in the Marine Corps, there was two different things. One is they gave you a strategic overview of the battlefield of what our mission is going to be, what we're trying to accomplish. But there was tactical training too. That was just, if this sound happens or gunfire, just drop to the ground and take cover. You don't ask, hey, I wonder what this thing is that's firing rounds at me. There's an immediate kind of response to it. You don't have to think. And so that's great to get the immediate response drills down, right? We have ransomware. This is what we do. There's no question asked. That's how you remove that asset. But then it impacts the business tremendously. Now you have reporting, you have breach, you know this, you do this for a living. So you have all these other things and customer impact that are way outside of the incident response forensics guys' purview, right? And we'll tell
Yeah.
you who hacked that system. We'll tell you who moved lateral. This is what the logs tell us. But how you ought to respond and make these decisions and communicate to your customers, and what are you going to tell the regulators? I mean, all that stuff comes out that they don't see. That's the part of the iceberg that's under the water that you don't kind of understand when you see. And but how do you make these decisions? They just make the thing worse. So kind of tell me, how do you stop that? How do you get a team that's used to using that mammalian brain there, and how do they start thinking better and adjusting as a team? I mean, you can train one person, but how do you address this from a team perspective?
Yeah. So I have a couple of different exercises or programs. So I have a workshop, which is first, the leaders are the ones that are going to set the protocols for how we make decisions. And so I have a leadership workshop where I bring the leaders together from a company. And as you said, this applies not only just to incident response, but it applies to situations where there are high stakes decisions being made. So M&A is a perfect example of that. You're bringing two companies together. You probably have some protocol that says we need to bring these companies together and start getting the revenue generation out of the two companies merging very quickly. So we have a M&A playbook. We have our incident response playbook, but what we don't do is we're not teaching, okay, when we make decision, who has the ball? So part of my workshop is really first getting people to understand when I walk into this room to make a decision, I do an assessment to help them understand what's my own bias towards decision making? What kind of things do I bring into the room when I make a decision? And then setting a shared agreement or a shared enablement, decision enablement framework for the organization that says, when we make decisions and it's these types of decisions, who is ultimately responsible for that? So, you could do it like a RACI or something like that, where you're getting, like who's responsible, accountable, all the different things. But getting that put on paper and running it just like you would your playbook is part of the process. So to your point is in incident response, we have a playbook that says when something happens, these are the technical things that we're going to go through. Your breach coach will start to say, okay, when that happens, you're going to call us and we're going to help you. What are the legal requirements? Then you might have a crisis comms team that helps you with crafting the messaging, and you might have another provider that stands up a call center for customer. But ultimately, the corporation and the executives in that company are responsible for saying yes. Yes, let's do that. Yes, let's do that. So it's really getting all the leaders together to agree on when we have a crisis. Josh has the ball for making this type of decision. He's the CISO in this organization. And when we get information, it comes from him and he's the one that validates that information. So it's really just setting up who is the person, what is their responsibility, and then we walk out of that room with that agreement. We add it to our playbooks.
Yeah. And I like how it's not just who's responsible for stuff, but how are you going through the biases of things and so forth. I could see where executives would bias some aspect of revenue generation, like some system is up and it needs to stay up for one reason. But it really is because it matches to their business goals for the year. And it's very small compared to the rest of the organization. So now me as an incident responder, I'm fighting a business guy to shut some segment down, mostly because it affects his bottom line versus how it looks holistically for the company. And so I think that's sort of some of the biases that you could talk about as well that comes into it. One of the things I think is really important, how do you get this to happen, is get everybody out of the blame management game when the incident's occurring, right? When they keep asking, why did this happen left and right? I can't stand that. It just diverts from everything. But we have to be very careful that I remember my platoon sergeant said, we will never have a uniform inspection in the middle of a firefight. And that's
Yeah,
true.
right.
We shouldn't do
Yeah.
that. We should reserve those questions of why to the later, unless it's really relevant. And I need to figure out why that was done because of
And
something else.
that's part of the story that we build, right? So when we do that fact assumption story and unknowns, the story is this happened for a reason. There's got to be a why. And let's
Right.
spend time thinking about the why. But to your point is this is not the time to think about the why. We're in that incident. It's occurring right now. We need to make decisions. We need to access our facts, rational brain as opposed to now trying to figure out why did this happen? Because it just takes us off track. Because when we start getting into an assumption or a story, that actually heightens our cognitive pressure that we're feeling. So when I start getting in my head and I think about the emotions, what happens? I
Mhm.
start sweating, like I get tense, I'm pacing, which then gets my brain thinking and even more. And then I start going, man, Josh, he just doesn't know what he's doing. That must be the reason. Josh is just a terrible CISO. That's the reason why this happened. And we're not actually solving the problem at that point. We're getting in our head and coming up with these stories that we're telling ourselves about why something happened.
No, taking accountability for some things as well in these different incidents. I like the idea of being able to build decision enablement. My time at EY or Ernst and Young, I was there right when they changed names. So we were Ernst and Young for about a year, and then the next year we're EY, and so it was really interesting to go through a branding. And the reason they did that is because EY is global and international, and people had a hard time in Asian countries saying Ernst and Young. So once everyone, all the cultures can say EY. So it was interesting on the reasoning for the branding, but decision enablement was what you got hired to do and build these worksheets that helped synthesize data into meaningful, actionable outcomes that the
Mhm.
customer could make a decision on. So if you're CISO of Bank of America or one of these that we were consulting on, you would tell them, okay, this is the major problem that you asked us to help solve or come up with our opinion about it. Here's the 3 or 4 options we see given this situation. And this is how, if you want to adjust the spreadsheet we created where you can move variables around, now it becomes this work product that you can use for decision enablement next time. It was a benefit. It wasn't just we came up with some number one time, but you can use this kind of moving forward. And I think that is solely missed in the playbooks. Like we had it with one who had authorization to install this trading platform. It's like a fintech company and they had the trading platform. Who was authorized to install this? Now, granted, this was during a tabletop exercise. But we walk through it and you say, all right, we have this system's down. We need to restore it completely from backup. Well, come to find out, they didn't even have the capabilities to do that. Didn't have the infrastructure or the licensing to actually do that. It sounds good when you have a provider that says, okay, they're backing up in the cloud. But it's so many instances where I find that the person who experiences cybersecurity and has no way to install or even get that system back up and running. There's no infrastructure that
Mhm.
they're going to be down for weeks as part of that.
Yeah, and that's an assumption that got made, which is we'll just restore from backup. That was the assumption.
That was the assumption, yeah, and I think that's where we pull them out in the tabletops that goes to your decision enablement piece of that. You made the assumption that you can just because these backups are running and they're being thrown in Azure cloud, doesn't mean you can actually restore it to a separate piece of infrastructure in the event this gets hit and we need to quarantine and we need to shut it down. So they're asking what is appropriate? Well, from an architecture perspective, what is your disaster recovery? It all goes back to your disaster recovery capabilities, your BCP plan. So if your
Mhm.
primary trading platform just went offline, what do you do normally? Forget about the cyber incident where we're trying to get it back from the cyber incident. What would you do if it just went offline? And there was so many companies don't even think about that. They don't think how do they do that until there's an incident and you just figure cybersecurity people will clean it up. But to be honest, the easiest way to get companies back up and running is not to do heavy investigations on what it is to identify it, contain it, shut it down, blow it away, get the systems back up and running, take maybe some of that forensics offline and so forth. But it really gets to fix the busted tire, get the car back up and running, and don't spend a lot of time doing it.
Yeah, yeah. But there's a lot of emotion that gets tied up into that. As to your point is, okay, well then how long will we be down? What will happen to the revenue? We've got customers that are calling in while everything's being restored from whatever is the BCP plan. So that's where, wait, technical guys, hold on a minute, because that's going to impact all of these things over here. So then there's delay, right? So there's that analysis paralysis. Like, really, is that the best thing to do? Should we do that? Should we not do that?
No, I know exactly right. And I think one of the pieces that you can work through to kind of make it realistic in many ways is just to tune those tabletops. I've seen where you're talking about the customer's actual environment and how their equipment's set up, and you kind of had some interviews with the BCP guys, and you kind of had some ideas, and you made the injects realistic because the first thing I've seen is different people trying to attack the injects because they would say, well, that's not realistic, or that wouldn't happen, or, we'd always be able to back up. It's in the cloud. And just all these assumptions, like you said, were there and kind of laid out. You just kind of have to customize a little bit more on
Yeah,
that.
when I would do tabletop exercises, because I was coming from the response side, which is I'm not in the forensics, I'm not in the breach coach side. I'm on we know something's happened and we're going to have to stand up services. So I'd be on the back end and I'd go in and I'd do one of these tabletop exercises. And I could walk out at the end of the day and I could either thumbs up or thumbs down based on the interaction that I saw from the executives in the room. So who was the loudest voice? Maybe not the person that should have been the loudest voice, but that person is the one who's speaking and saying, these are the decisions that we're going to make. So I could see just watching the people in the room, whether when they had an incident or if they had an incident, who was going to be successful and which companies weren't. They were going to have a hard time because they didn't have a good decision enablement protocol. Everybody wanted to be the chief. That's what happens. Executives, they all want to be, especially I'm like, love them. The CEO wants to be the person that's saying, yes, we're going because they're decisive and they're going to move forward and let's get this off the table and move on. So I can tell based on the interactions in the room who was going to have a successful incident and who was going to have a really rough time.
It's amazing how that actually comes up. You can see the camaraderie of the leadership team or the direct team too. And you and I were talking about this, how in tabletops, I like splitting them up where you have a tactical tabletop and then you have a strategic tabletop. And you can't put the actors you can't put the CEO and the incident response and the security forensics guys on the same call. Unless it's a very small call, very small company, and that's all you have. But a normal SMB to large size company, absolutely not. I've been in many incidents where I've had to separate the two and just say, okay, executive team, CEO, CFO, if you could, I need you to pull your BCP plans, pull your insurance requirements, who's your critical third parties,
Mhm.
tell them that what's going on, involve your breach counsel, get legal up to speed on what's happening, go handle that. Technical team, let's go start grabbing machines, put them in quarantine, user EDR, let's start grabbing these logs.
Yeah.
And I bifurcate the meeting right then and there and separate them and have a daily tactical bridge that we're on for the IR team. And then I have a once a day for the executive team briefing, usually in the evening. And one of the things is I always learned how to praise to get what I need out of the executive team. Like, for instance, when I'm able to hold them off asking a bunch of questions while the technical team finds out, like there's so many unknowns, give us an hour here to figure out. I would thank them. I said, look, thank you for giving the IR team time to actually work and do the diligence they need to come up with the information, because nobody likes it when a boss is or an executive is asking them a bunch of questions that they can't answer at the time. And it would just take away from fighting the fire. But I appreciate the maturity y'all had of not doing that. Now, there was a couple of people that weren't doing that, right? So they were actually causing chaos, but I complimented the entire senior management team just so those two guys heard it. And I think that's the key there is giving your people the time and the space. But I do think about it is if once you start walking through a breach, or there should be a high level messaging and process that you know you're going to say out there, and even the
Yeah.
announcements to your customers should already be templatized in
Yes.
your documentation. This is what we're going to say, and we're just going to change the 10,000 records to the 50,000 records to whatever, and change some of the detail. And then I can get that out because these regulatory requirements are now within 48 hours of notice. You're supposed to do
Yes.
announcements, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
you're
those are
now
the best playbooks is when you're considering not only just the technical side, but also you're going through the technical regulatory requirements and now customer facing, web facing, whatever it is that you're going to release to the public. So those are the three pieces. And to your point, I agree with you is if you have some holding statements or you have some information that you know that any type of breach, now we could just insert in some additional detail that should be part of the playbook too.
Yeah, and, data mining capabilities, right? Especially I work for these big banks. I have no idea how many thousands of records were included in that dump. I need some mining capabilities to go, who was involved, who not, so they can send the proper notices out and not have to boil the ocean and notify everybody. There's whole companies that are around this, right? They do data mining post-breach,
Yeah,
figure out and to send out the letters and to get you on credit monitoring and all that kind of stuff, because doing it yourself would be massively difficult. And it's much easier to give it to providers who that's what they specialize. That's all they do.
that's right.
And they can help reduce your risk of fumbling. That's where I think the key here in an incident is identifying, A, do you have confidential data that went out the door? Yes, no, maybe. What is this classification? And then engaging your breach coaches early when you know data has been out
Yeah.
there.
And I think that's part of decision enablement, which is when do you delegate the decision? So, something that's happening like an incident, which is we want to make the decisions, but part of enablement is to know when you're over your skis and you got to bring in your experts, your third party experts, forensics, the breach coaches, the crisis communications. Like, how big is this thing that we need to engage third parties because it's now beyond our decision capabilities. We need other people that do this every day to advise us on what's the right direction that we need to take.
Yeah, yeah. And I see it almost like when you see these police officers take down a dangerous felon with a gun or whatever. There's two, three people that are on the ground doing the actual hands-on, putting the handcuffs. But there's this ring of the police officers that are watching from the perimeter of things to protect the officers on the ground. And they're handling the strategic problem here. I need to call EMT. I need to call the captain. I need to start taking command. And so the sergeant, the police sergeant on the ground would start doing those strategic things while there's a tactical playbook. The guy has a weapon, take him down, put handcuffs, put him in the back of the car. They know the playbook. So to me, that's the same as like the ransomware attack. You have an incident, you handle it this way. But that perimeter of how do you handle strategic is one of the most difficult. I mean, we're pretty good at ransomware attacks and phishing attacks and responding to them. It's the level, the regulatory issues and the decision management and all that stuff that we used to call level 8, layer 8 stuff. And the OSI model, you have networking, all goes up to
Yes.
level 7. The political was always layer 8. And of the OSI model, essentially, is the decisions that executives make. How do they make the right ones? But to be honest, I've been on the technical teams and I've been on the executive teams, and we do a disservice to the executive on the technical team, just the way we articulate what the problem is and what do we say. I mean, we throw a lot of technical jumbo out there at them. We don't really give them answers in order to be able to synthesize that to figure out, should I do this? They end up asking a bunch of questions where you're like, what don't you understand? It's this ransomware and it's going laterally and it's this huge disconnect because they speak different languages. So
Yeah,
I see it
and that's
where,
part of the decision enablement too, which is knowing what type of information to share with the executives. So if you're technical, we're not trying to dumb it down, but we're trying to put it into a format that can be consumed by the other party. And that's part of, I'm technical, I'm the executive, I'm looking out for the company's best interests. I don't need all the technical details, but that's part of the communication exercise. That's part of decision enablement, which is
mm,
getting the right information to the right people at the right time. So what are the facts? And then the questions come, but you don't have to just regurgitate everything, all the technical details, because now you're overwhelming your audience.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It makes a whole lot of sense when you sit down and go through it. But I think the emotions, when those start happening, I remember, a lot of training was stress inoculation. How do you just get used to things blowing up and gunfire and so forth? And if you just got accustomed to that level, then you're able to calm down. You're not in that panic mode. It's something you're used to. You're able to think clearly during
Yeah.
those chaotic
I
time
think
periods.
I think that's true to an extent, but I think, and maybe you're wired because of, your military background is you're wired in that way, and you have ways of how you de-stress. But a lot of people aren't capable of doing that on their own, where they have ways of when I'm out of crisis, how do I bring myself back down so that my nervous system is reset and now I can go for the next incident. The reason why I built this program, Awakening Performance, is I was doing breach response for 6 years. COVID hit. My mom got really, really sick. She got really ill. So now I'm managing breaches for clients, managing all the client relationships, flying around the country, doing tabletop exercises. And then for clients that were having breaches, managing the executive relationship with the client. And then my mom's illness got progressively worse. So now not only am I dealing with the cognitive stress of work and the cognitive pressure of work, I also have a full-time job outside of work managing all the details of what's going on with my mom. And it became too much for my system. There was never a time or an ability to reset. So I burned out. I burned out of breach response, and I left and moved to a different role. So I think with the decision enablement and decision clarity that I'm teaching, I'm also teaching awareness, which is when being aware of your own cognitive breaking point. Like, when is it at the point
Yeah.
of, I need to go outside, get some fresh air. I'm not thinking clearly. And a lot of us don't do that. We just react. We're in urgency mode. We're waiting for the next bad thing to happen. You and I were talking, and it's like your husband or your wife comes home and says, hey, I got to talk to you. And And immediately, because we've done breach response or we've been incident response, we're like, oh no, what bad thing just happened that I have to deal with?
Yeah, that's
So
exactly
we're
what
wired for that.
I am. I'm completely wired for that, and I do. And my wife tells me that a lot. She goes, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something," and I'm immediately, "What broke? What
Yeah.
this time?" Because
Yeah. And,
sometimes she
and
tries to soften that, right? And because I just that's my job is to deal with things going bad all day long.
that's right. I mean, so now we're wired for, I worked with a chief privacy officer in one of my programs. She was part of my cohort, and she didn't realize, because it's an accumulation over time, is that now her nervous system was set that she was only looking for the negative. She was only looking for what is the next bad thing that could possibly happen that spins up my privacy team to deal with, the marketing team wanting to launch a program.
Yeah, you're waiting for the next disaster to drop. I
Yes.
definitely,
Yeah.
I know what that feels like.
Yeah, so, what I'm doing is I'm teaching awareness. So I'm teaching, like, what's your own personal bias towards decision making. So when I walk into a room of other executives, I know subconsciously or consciously now, because I brought it up, but I'm now aware, where do I have bias? What does my brain immediately jump to? What assumption do I immediately make?
Yeah. Well, and to tell you something that goes along with that is procrastination. So I procrastinate on things that my brain has not fully processed yet. Like I don't
Mhm.
really know what I'm going to say in that email. So I put it off until my brain's done processing and so forth. So it seems like I'm ADHD sometimes. I'm jumping from one thing to another. And sometimes I wonder if I really am ADHD. But a lot of times is I don't know what the next thing is on this thing, like this interacted I'm having with this client or this Azure cloud thing or whatever it may be. And so I just put it off to the side and I pick up something else that I may have some idea with. And I want to push forward. So I do have a bias towards what type of work is
Well,
what I want to
in fact,
prioritize.
everybody has that bias. So it's a safety bias. So your brain is telling you at that point in time, your brain is telling you, I don't know what I don't know. So to keep me safe, I'm just not going to think about that thing anymore and I'm going to set it aside. And then in the background, what's happening is your brain actually hasn't let go of that thing. So now if we think about like technical operating systems, so now you got that thing spinning in the back of your brain while you tackle some of these other things that feel easier, but you
Mhm.
still have that other thing. You haven't let it go. It's still there. You haven't It's actually just in the background. That's why sometimes we're not thinking about something, it just pops back up into the foreground. And you're like, oh, yeah, now I know how to solve that problem because it
Right.
never left you.
They took it offline, started processing offline. And those computer guys, the brain makes a whole lot of sense. It just
Yes.
started paging it to disk and took it
Yeah,
out
it's a
of
background
active
process,
memory.
right? Like back in the
Right.
Windows days where you would open up and you'd see, why is my laptop pegging
Right.
on memory? Oh, I've got all these background processes.
I think there's also this piece when incidents occur, people see the character of people that step up, right? I've seen in many companies where some of the most senior executives just melt away. They're like, "Yeah, I hope you have this." They're not a part of it. They don't engage, but they did it in the right way. It wasn't their area of expertise. They trusted you and your team to do it. That was great. But they always had these executives that felt that they had to exert themselves in order to grow up that chain, that you're being this person that's forward thinking and you're taking everything on. And I think they get themselves into trouble, which causes a lot of problems in the incident. They want to come up with some big save. The team was going to do this and I had shut that down. We're going to lose 1 million on that. And so they want to show that they're exerting themselves, but really there's no need for them to do that. And the reason they do that is so they don't appear weak. So there's
Mhm.
decisions that get made and script the incident response team because someone personally, an executive's ego doesn't want to seem weak in this situation. So they interject themselves when they should just be quiet. But at the
But
same time,
that's a bias, right? So that's part of the fight,
right?
flight, freeze, fawn. Our cognitive bias, which is, so that person could be a fighter. So there could be like, the way I show value is I'm the director, I'm telling everybody what we're going to do and I save the day. So I'm, I'm fighting about, you know, I got to show that I'm strong, right? So that's a, a bias that that person has towards, I got to show that I'm the leader. And the way I show that I'm the leader is I get myself involved and I save the day.
Yeah. And that saved the day mentality. I think it all comes from senior leadership because I've been on two senior management teams. I've had to interact with executives a lot. And that culture all permeates from the top. So if there's constant blame management, like I want who's responsible for that? The entire senior management team stops trying to fix the problem and tries to cover their ass and write emails to cover their ass. And it is so debilitating. It is so toxic
Yeah.
to that. And I think
That's why I'm advocating for put it into your playbook, this decision enablement place.
Mhm.
So anytime there is a crisis incident, we open the playbook and we look at who has the responsibility for these different tasks. And then we do the playbook. That's where you're documenting the process. You test it in the tabletop. So you tested and validated the process. And then this last piece is decision enablement. That's really looking at now we're talking about the human element, which is now we're talking about who has the responsibility. So there's the process, and we've tested the process, validated it, and now we're with decision enablement, we're looking at the human side of it, which is when we're under pressure, how are we going to respond to this situation?
Right. And I think it reduces the stress, especially when you know you have it written down. If you're trying to remember who's in charge of what at the
Yes.
time, I think that's a disastrous situation. So it's
Yeah,
always
or
good
if
to.
we go off script, which is we had it documented, but then we decided to throw the playbook out, and we know
Mhm.
that's a terrible idea too.
Yeah, and I think what happened a lot of times I get in these incidents, we ask them where their playbook is, and they never run from it. A lot of times it's off of memory, and oh yeah, we had one a while back, and okay, can you pull it up? It's different when you do incidents where they're off the street. I get a call, we jump in. I have no idea how their network's set up. We spent the first couple, I don't know, 30 minutes, 40 minutes trying to figure out what's what and where are you at, versus having a retainer where that's your customer for the year. You meet on these monthly occasions, you meet on these tabletops, you do this kind of stuff, and you can walk through these. So I never see the decision enablement in the ones where they just call you where there's a fire. But having the tabletops, having the retainer, I saw that in a meeting here in Charlotte. There was a group meeting down here in Charlotte. It was a CISO advisory council or something like that. There's like 8 CISOs from around the North Carolina region. I was surprised. They were all talking about incident response retainers and having people set aside where when there is a fire, you know exactly who to call. They have
Mhm.
the access they need. You're not trying to troubleshoot permissions in the middle of a disaster because that never works. I never can get my account to work right in a disaster versus if it was already set up, we already know it's working, shut it down, and you can put a ticket in to turn it on when we need to jump in and we need to do things. A lot of people don't think about that clearly and want that maturity level, but I see it changing. All the CISOs now are asking for it. Their management team's asking for it. And I related it to Hurricane Katrina when the gas contracts that we were talking about earlier, where the fuel contract, you had one bank had a state of the art generator system. The other one that was several years old. But the one that was several years old had a fuel contract. So Shell or whoever was the provider at the time will bring in diesel so the generators can continue to run. Katrina was horrible. Nobody thought power would be down for that long, nor would the
Mhm.
streets be flooded where you couldn't get supplies into it. So it's just a massive disaster. And the bank I was working with, their data center was right smack in the middle of all that. So
Yeah.
became a very, very challenging time period. But you could see about the person who thought about the decisions of the fuel contract and they thought about all of that and worked through those. They were successful. They had a fuel contract. Other people didn't. And that's the same way in cybersecurity, where if you don't have a contract, when there's a massive disaster, the next cyber tsunami, all of us are going to be engaged. You're not going to be able to get a new responder on
Yeah,
contract. They're not going to take any new customers. That's how it works.
you'll get in line behind everybody that already has a retainer.
Yeah, who has the retainers, number one, and number two, who you're empaneled with. So if you're in incident response and you're on 4 panels and you're in Chubb's panel and Republic's panel and all these different panels, you have to be able to service those panels. So your primary responsibility in a disaster is who you got a who you have a contract with, and I have a retainer contract with, and then who are you're empaneled with. After that, they don't accept new customers in a crisis. You just don't have the capacity. You have to meet your contractual obligations. So they're not going to take you. And it doesn't matter how much money you have at that time because they just don't have the resources to get to you. So
Yeah,
that's why I
I
think
agree.
it's important.
I agree. Yeah, so I mean, to me, it's 3 things. It's the playbook, having a good playbook where you're validating You're validating the process that's in the playbook in a tabletop. And then the last piece is cognitive performance. So decision enablement all comes down to how do we think about decisions and how do we make the decisions when we're under pressure? Because everybody can make calm, rational decisions where it's in peacetime. But when we're in an incident, it is a whole level of pressure that a lot of people, when I would do tabletop exercises with clients, we would run through them. We do them once a year, and they'd never experienced, knock on wood, a big one, the big breach. They had smaller ones, but not the big one. That was weeks after weeks after weeks of we've contained it, but now it's flowing through. The customers are calling, the regulators are calling, the media is calling. It's weeks and weeks and weeks of the aftermath of this happened. Now we've got to deal with the comms part of it. So the incident responders, the IT guys, the security guys, they're back to normal, but now the rest of the organization is dealing with customers calling, clients calling, regulators calling.
And then the remediation work happens. So post-incident, all right, you've just had the security incident, you're recovering, but there's so many things that are missing. Like even today, multi-factor authentication. We've heard this for 20 years, multi-factor authentication, right? Still the number one reason we're having breaches today. People still don't have it turned on or using it properly. So some of this basic blocking and tackling still are not occurring. So once you've had a breach, you need some remediation. So that's when you would go from documenting what happened to recommend you install an MDR solution so somebody's monitoring 24/7. I recommend you get a virtual CISO, have a governance structure to start your program. The great thing about having a vCISO or virtual CISO is this program's going to run, it's going to show up every month, there's going to be a quarterly month. The thing gets pushed forward, which is the most difficult internally, is pushing these things forward sometimes and enabling, you to handle bigger levels of business and scale, having the proper mentality and team members in
Yeah.
place.
And I would say part of that remediation is spending time on how do we work together as a team? How did it go? When we had to make these big decisions, did we do that effectively? Did we have some bumps? What do we need to do? So we're not just remediating the technical side of it, but we're looking about that decision enablement, which is where did we fall down when it came to our decision making? So that's the part that is a gap, I think, today where we're not spending time on when we were in the thick of it and it was the highest pressure. How do we perform as an organization in making those critical decisions? Did we do it effectively? Did we have friction? What were the decision friction points? How do we get better next time?
And it's great about your approach is you get taking a much more detailed approach towards it, is that gets brought out just a little bit in an
For
incident
sure.
at the end of saying, well, there was confusion from management and who was responsible for what. I mean, we say this general consultant boilerplate thing, right?
Yeah.
We don't really actually get, Bob should have taken charge and he didn't, and he was supposed to do, I mean, we never got into that kind of stuff. And the postmortems, but I think it's so critical to have some greater clarity on the decision made, especially at the strategic level. But then at the tactical, they need to know who's authorized to take these systems down. So
Yeah.
that's
And I
exciting stuff.
agree. I think the reason for that is because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to talk about, we didn't actually we weren't cohesive as a team, and that feels uncomfortable to talk about it and share it openly.
Yeah. Yeah. It gets a little sensitive. I could see that. Man, Lisa, this was a great episode of the show. I learned a lot from you. I love talking about this kind of stuff because it really does help guide your life. And talk about restructuring your stress life. Things would be so much less stressful if you had clear lines of communication, clear lines of organization, and clear lines of who's responsible for what decisions. And they knew it. It wasn't like the CEO thinks Bob's supposed to be doing it. No, Bob even knows Bob's supposed to be doing it.
Yeah, it's part of the playbook. It just becomes part of the playbook, which is, I will tell you, you can build an amazing incident response playbook. You're gonna encounter a new thing that you didn't think about, and that's the part where, okay, now we're uncertain about how to handle this particular scenario. We didn't practice this, so we don't know what to do.
Well, Lisa, tell me more here. So, as we wrap the show up, where can we find out more about you and what you're doing now and follow some of the things that you have going on?
Yeah, sure. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I post a lot about leadership, decision clarity, everything that we talked about today. I also have a podcast myself, but what I do is I'm giving people short mini resets. So everything that we talked about today around decision clarity, decision enablement, bringing awareness to what's happening to me when I make decisions, but also giving me those protocols of how do I come back to present? So some breathing exercises, things like that. Instagram, also have a YouTube channel. My website is www.mindfulcorporatemastery.com. I know that's a lot, and I've got some free resources there. So that's where you can find me.
That's excellent. So everybody needs to check her out. I want to thank everybody for joining us on Cybersecurity America. Please hit that like, subscribe, put any comments you want in the comment field there. We'll respond as quickly as possible, and stay secure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Cybersecurity America.